The separations between things are abstract. They are concepts. In the same way, for example, as lines of latitude and longitude are concepts, even though a Russian poet has recently made a beautiful poem about the world being like a ball carried in a net bag. But you never expect to trip over the equator when you cross it. And although it is something quite abstract and does not exist in nature, it's extremely useful for purposes of navigation. So in the same way, bitting and having words to describe particular events or particular wiggles in the universal pattern are very useful. But they are very dangerous when you confuse things with natural events. Because then you get into this sort of trouble. The trouble of the sorcerer. The surgeon, who is too much of a specialist in one organ, runs into that organ and alters it and does what he considers a better mechanical job than the Lord did. But then he discovers, to his dismay and the even greater dismay of his patient, that the operation has unforeseen consequences in some other part of the organism because he didn't realize the connection. When likewise we object to certain insect pests. Oh, we say, get rid of them. DDT. And so, but then we found we got rid of something else that we didn't want to get rid of. And worse still, that this insect that we didn't like was doing a job for us in some manner of which we weren't aware, and we only become aware of it when suddenly we find ourselves covered with another kind of fly altogether, or with some sort of bacteria which this insect kept down. Watch it, watch it, watch it, because nature does not consist of separate things which you can just pull out like parts from an engine. Take the case of bees and flowers. Oh, we always use the bees and flowers to explain fundamental things about life. But we're going to go deeper than sex this time. Fascinating thing about bees and flowers is they are very different looking things. A flower sits still and blooms, and it smells, or stinks to be correct. The bee moves about and buzzes, but they are all one organism. You don't find flowers without bees. You don't find bees without flowers. They are just as much one as your head and your feet, which also look very different. So in that sense, you see, we are one with the incredible complexity of processes and wiggles upon which we depend. Although to say upon which we depend is not quite accurate, because that separates us from it, as if I were hanging onto a beam and depending on it. It isn't like that. You don't depend on it because it depends on you. It's a mutual arrangement. And it isn't that one bit of this sort of came first, although that sometimes happens. But it's always there in potentiality, what came later. But it's rather in the same way that when a flower opens, you see all the different petals extending simultaneously, especially when you watch a fast motion movie of a flower opening. And so in the same way, there is a simultaneous arrival or evolution of the human organism and the human environment. And thus, biologists speak about the evolution of an environment as well as the evolution of an organism in it. In other words, human beings could not have appeared on this planet until its temperature had lowered to a certain degree, until the atmosphere contained certain gases as a result of vegetative development. And then the environment became evolved enough for human beings to appear in it. Evolved enough? I'll say something further. Intelligent enough for the appearance in it of intelligent beings. For your environment is intelligent. Otherwise you couldn't be. You see, as Jesus said, you don't gather figs off thistles or grapes from thorns. you won't get pears off an apple tree. So, you won't find people except on a people tree. And this planet, this solar system, this galaxy is peopling in exactly the same way that an apple tree apples. Put our existence into verb language as distinct from noun language, and you're much closer to the point. You see, nouns have the difficulty of designating things. Verbs designate process. Now, everything is a process, really. When we speak of housing for houses, matting for mats, we're getting there. The Nootka Indians have a language in which there are no nouns. And so they say, it houses, and then they add an adverb to show whether it houses religiously, homily, or marketingly. And so they see the world as the flow. What is it that houses? What is it that rains when we say it is raining? You see, we always have a funny idea that to get a verb, that is to say to get action, you have to have an agent. Now, this is the most ridiculous idea conceivable. How can a noun start a verb? How can a thing start an event? Because there's no action in a thing. Action can only come from action. Energy from energy. You can't get energy from a concept, because nouns are all concepts. They're abstract, really. It's only verbs that are concrete, because the world is process. Now, common sense insists that the pattern of the world must be made of something, because we still think with Aristotle's common sense, or with the imagery of the book of Genesis, where God made Adam out of the clay. In other words, he made a clay figurine and breathed breath into it, and it became alive. And so we constantly think that we as are made of flesh, as if flesh were some sort of stuff like clay out of which you shape bodies, or like you make tables out of wood. Are trees made out of wood? What a ridiculous question. Trees are wood. They're not made of wood. And it's simply this artifact thing that gives us the idea of the world being made out of something. It isn't made out of anything. And so when physics tries to investigate what is the stuff of matter, they can't find any. Because you can never talk about anything except a process. You can describe what a process is doing. You can describe the structure, the nature of the dance, whether it's doing a waltz or a mazurka or the frog or whatever it is. And then you can describe that melody, shall we say, what it is performing. But there is nothing doing the performing at all. There is no stuff out of which it's being done, because when you examine stuff, you just find more pattern. See, what you mean by stuff is fuzz. When you look at something with a lens and you're out of focus, you see fuzz. But when you come into focus, you see structure. All right, now, the structure is made of all sorts of little lines and things. You can see them, and you want to know what are they made of. So you turn up the magnification, and for a while you get a lot of fuzz, but when you're clear again, you see that those little lines are also made of more little lines, more structure. And big patterns have little patterns upon their backs to bite them, and so on. And that's the way it goes. So suddenly you feel rather insecure, because stuff has disappeared. There's a famous story about a physicist who understood this so well that he always went about in the most enormous padded shoes, because he was afraid of falling through the floor. Now look what's happened. Just look and see what has happened to us. If we go through everything that I've been saying, we find, first of all, that the thing that we thought was I is nothing more than a social institution. Just like the equator, or an inch, And to mistake it, to reify it, as Whitehead would say, is the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. It's strictly a hallucination. And any certain amount of psychological self-exploration shows this to be the case. For what we are is the organism, and what the organism is a transactional interchange between the organism and the environment. It's not quite correct to say you're doing it and it's doing you, because, see, Whitehead, in describing the scientific philosophy, saying, for example, that blue is entirely our projection on the sky, he's half right, you see. Those scientists he's talking about are half right. But the part of it that is left out of consideration is this. True, you, with your optical nerves and eyes, transform the sky into the blue feeling. But without the sky, you wouldn't have any optical nerves. It works both ways, you see. Without the air, whose density gives the blue effect. It's mutual. You do it, and it does you. But that's, as I said, a two-way, a clumsy way of talking about it's all one process, a unified process. And furthermore, from this process there has disappeared what we thought was solidity, what we thought was common sense, substance, and stuff. It's just pattern. And at once one feels sort of ghostly, as if you could be easily blown away. And that's why the Hindus call the universe the Maya, which means the illusion. Don't forget, illusion is related to the Latin word ludere, to play. So the play, the big act. It also means magic, as in a conjurer's creation of an illusion. It also means creative power. It also means art. And finally, it means the divine power. The Maya of the Lord. Lord is a bad translation of Bhagavan. Just the divine one. The Lord means boss in English. And the Hindus don't do it that way. But now you see, I've arranged this general introduction, which I'm afraid will be familiar to some of you who have attended my seminars before, but I've arranged this general introduction to raise the question, all right, if that's the way it is, how on earth are we going to arrange a transformation of man's consciousness so that he'll know it, not just in theory, but something he feels in the same way as you feel what you take to be I at the present moment, confronting an external world? How will you transform that sensation? Because if you don't transform that sensation, you will not ever be fit to use technology. We shall continue to use our technology in a hostile spirit towards the external world, and we shall wreck the external world. We're busy doing it now. There is no necessity to abandon technology. We can't abandon it. But we can certainly use it in a different spirit.